They auctioned off the last piece of my grandmother's life for $1. Not her wedding ring, not her photographs, not the handmade quilt she had stitched over 40 years of winter evenings. Those had all been taken by relatives I had never met, distant cousins who appear like crows after a harvest, picking through what remained of a life before the body was even cold. No, what they auctioned for $1 was a thing nobody wanted. A derelict British Railways signal box, sitting on a strip of land my grandmother had owned since 1987, perched at the edge of the old Darnwell Junction line in rural Shropshire, a line that had been closed since 1968. The box was 30 feet long and 12 feet wide, elevated on a brick base with a rusted iron staircase that groaned when the wind blew. Half the windows were boarded. The roof sagged on the eastern side. The lever frame inside, 42 levers of cast iron that had once controlled trains across 3 counties, had not moved in over 50 years. The auctioneer had described it as a liability. He was right technically, but he was also entirely, completely wrong. My name is Wren Calloway. I was 18 years old on the morning of that auction, standing in the rain outside a solicitor's office in Shrewsbury with my younger sister Piper beside me, her 11-year-old hand tucked inside my coat pocket because she had lost her glove and I had lost mine, and neither of us had thought to buy new ones because we had not expected to be outside for long. We had expected to be inside. We had expected to be told that our grandmother, Eleanor Callaway, had left us something, a flat, maybe a small savings account, some piece of the life she had built alone after our grandfather died. Instead, we were told that Eleanor Callaway had died with 43,000 pounds of debt, the result of a private care home that had charged her 1,200 pounds a week for the last 3 years of her life. The house had been sold to pay the fees. Her savings were gone. Her furniture, her car, her jewelry, all liquidated. What remained, after the creditors had taken everything they could reach, was the strip of land with the signal box. The land was designated as a former railway easement, and it had a complicated legal status that made it essentially unsaleable. The signal box itself was a Grade 2 listed structure, which meant it could not be demolished, but also that anyone who owned it was legally required to maintain it, an obligation that came with costs but no obvious benefits. It was, in every measurable sense, a burden, which is why, when the solicitor told us we could either accept it or disclaim it, every adult in the room told us to disclaim it. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The social worker who had accompanied us said it firmly. The solicitor said it gently. Even the auctioneer, who was there to sell it to someone if we declined, said it practically. "You're young," he told me, studying me with eyes that were not unkind but were absolutely convinced they already knew how this story ended. "You've got no money, no fixed address, and you're about to enter the care system. The last thing you need is a listed building with a leaking roof." I looked at Piper. She was watching the auctioneer with a particular expression she reserved for people who underestimated her, a kind of patient, measuring stillness that she had inherited from our grandmother. "What's inside it?" I asked. "Beg your pardon?" "The signal box. What's inside it?" The auctioneer blinked. "Levers, I imagine. Old signaling equipment. Possibly some original British Railways fittings. Mostly junk." "Mostly," I said. "Wren," the social worker began. I accepted the signal box. £1. Transferred from the small amount in my pocket, because the solicitor said we needed to mark the transaction. The social worker drove us away in a car that smelled of air freshener and institutional patience, and I watched the signal box recede to the rear window. Its dark exterior wet with rain, its windows like closed eyes, sitting at the edge of a field that had not seen a train in over 50 years. Piper pressed her face close to mine so only I could hear her. "Gran used to talk about it," she whispered, "when I stayed with her last summer. She said there was something inside she had been keeping safe." I turned to look at her. "She said that?" "She said—" Piper paused, choosing her words with the precision she always used for important things. "She said that some things are worth more when no one knows their value. Let me tell you about the month before we went back. We were placed with a foster family in Telford, a couple who were perfectly decent and genuinely overwhelmed by a teenager who barely slept and an 11-year-old who read encyclopedias for pleasure. They had 2 biological children and a household routine that had no obvious room for grief or eccentricity. We were grateful and we were lonely and we were counting the days. I was allowed to leave the house during reasonable hours, which I used to go to the library and research. I researched British Railways signal boxes obsessively. I learned that Darnwell Junction had been a significant interchange point in the 1940s and 1950s, handling both goods trains and passenger services across the Welsh Marches. I learned that the signal box there had been built in 1923 to a Midland Railway design, one of only a handful of that particular type still standing anywhere in England. I learned that the lever frame inside, if original, would be a Tire and Company No. 6 configuration, which railway historians consider one of the finest mechanical signaling instruments ever manufactured. I learned that original Tire and Company lever frames in working condition were extraordinarily rare. I also learned something else, something that the solicitor had not mentioned, something that the social worker did not know, something that the auctioneer certainly had not considered. My grandmother had been corresponding for 7 years with the Shropshire Railway Heritage Trust. I found this through a volunteer who ran the trust website, a retired signalman named Bernard Croft, who answered my email within 2 hours and asked me, quite directly, if I was Eleanor Callaway's granddaughter. When I said yes, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your grandmother was one of the most remarkable researchers I ever encountered. What she found in that signal box changed what we thought we knew about the history of that line." "What did she find?" I asked. A pause. "I think," Bernard said carefully, "you should go and see for yourself. And when you have, please call me." We went back on a Saturday in early March, 6 weeks after the auction. I had saved enough bus fare for both of us and borrowed a torch from the Foster family, claiming we were going for a walk. The signal box looked smaller in daylight than I remembered from the rain, but it also looked more deliberate, more intentional. Someone had built this structure to last. The brick base was solid Victorian engineering, and the timber upper section, though weathered, had been constructed with the kind of craftsmanship that does not appear in modern buildings. Every joint was precise. Every board had been placed with care. The iron staircase groaned under our weight, but held. The door at the top was padlocked with a lock I did not have a key for. I was standing there working out what to do when Piper reached into her coat pocket and produced a small iron key on a length of faded ribbon. I stared at it. "Gran gave it to me last summer," she said simply. She said, "Keep it safe, and don't lose it, and you'll know when to use it." The lock opened smoothly, the way locks do when they've been regularly oiled by someone who intended them to be used. We stepped inside. I need to try to describe what we saw, though I am not sure words are quite adequate. The signal box was a long, narrow room with windows along the track-facing side, most of them still intact behind their wooden boards, diffusing the light into something soft and even. The floor was original timber, swept clean. The ceiling was low, crossed by painted beams, and along the entire length of the far wall, mounted on a frame of painted cast iron that rose to chest height and ran for 20 feet, were the levers, 42 of them, standing in a row like soldiers. Each one was approximately 5 feet tall, tapering from a broad base to a polished wooden handle. They were painted in the original British Railways colors: red for stop signals, black for facing points, blue for facing point locks, white for spare, each color still vivid despite 50 years of disuse. The metalwork gleamed. Someone had been polishing it. Recently, Gran came here. Piper said quietly, running her finger along the base of the nearest lever, "Look, this is clean." She was right. The lever frame had been meticulously maintained. The pivot points had been oiled. The locking mechanisms had been kept free of rust. Whoever had cared for this equipment had known exactly what they were doing and had done it with love. But it was not the levers that stopped my breath. It was what was behind them, built into the wall behind the lever frame, accessible only by squeezing to the narrow gap between the last lever and the end wall, was a door. Not a large door, perhaps 4 feet tall and 2 feet wide, set flush into the paneling so perfectly that you would never see it unless you were looking. It had no handle, only a keyhole, the same small iron key. Piper held it out to me. I took it. My hand was not entirely steady. The door opened inward onto a space I had not imagined. A room, roughly 8 feet by 6, built into the brick base of the signal box structure, accessible from inside through a concealed door. The air inside was dry and cool, slightly musty but not damp, protected by the brick on 3 sides and the timber structure above. Someone had waterproofed it carefully. Lining the walls with a material I later learned was a Victorian-era oilcloth, designed to keep moisture out of railway instrument stores. This had not been built recently. This had been built a long time ago by someone who intended to hide something permanently. Against one wall were shelves, built from the same timber as the signal box floor. On the shelves were boxes, the kind used for archiving documents, each one labeled in a handwriting I recognized immediately as my grandmother's. But beneath those boxes on the lowest shelf were older things, much older. A canvas satchel, military green, stenciled with the initials TRC. A tin cash box with a combination lock. A rolled canvas, perhaps 2 feet long, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with tape, and leaning against the shelf, as though it had been placed there carefully and deliberately by someone who wanted it to be the first thing seen. A photograph in a simple wooden frame. The photograph showed 2 people standing in front of the signal box. One was my grandmother, Eleanor Calloway, much younger, perhaps in her 30s. She was laughing at something outside the frame, her head thrown back, completely unguarded in the way people only are when they trust absolutely whoever is holding the camera. The other person was a man I had never seen before. He was older than her by perhaps 20 years, lean and upright, with the kind of face that makes you think of precision and patience. He was not laughing, but he was smiling, and the smile was in his eyes more than his mouth. On the back of the photograph, in handwriting I did not recognize, unfamiliar and different from my grandmother's. For Eleanor, everything here belongs to you and to whoever comes after you. Guard it well. With all my love, Thomas. I sat down on the floor of that hidden room, which is not something I planned to do, and I read the name again. Thomas. TRC. The canvas satchel. Piper, I said. Did Gran ever mention anyone named Thomas? My sister was examining the shelves with the methodical attention she gave to everything. She paused. She had a photograph on her bedside table, she said slowly. I asked her once who it was. She said he was a person who taught her that some things only reveal their value to people who are patient enough to wait. I picked up the canvas satchel carefully. The canvas was stiff with age but intact. The flap buckle was stiff but operational. Inside was a leather folder, cracked with age, and inside the folder were papers. Not just papers, documents. Meticulous, dated, authenticated documents. A hand-drawn map of the Darnwell Junction line and its surrounding land. Correspondence between Thomas R. Callaway, described in the letterheads as a senior railway civil engineer, and various offices of the Midland Railway, then British Railways, spanning from 1948 to 1967. Technical drawings, each one annealed and dated. And beneath all of that, something that made my hand stop entirely. A surveyor's report, dated 1962, commissioned privately by Thomas R. Callaway. The subject was the geological formation beneath the land adjacent to the Darnwell Junction signal box. I read it 3 times. Then I picked up the tin cash box from the shelf and found it was not locked. Inside was a letter, folded once, in my grandmother's handwriting, dated 4 months before she died. My dear Wren, if you are reading this, then Piper gave you the key, which means she remembered, which means I was right about her, as I have always been right about her. I need to tell you about Thomas. Thomas Randolph Callaway was my father-in-law. He died before you were born, before your father was born. In fact, in 1971, he was a railway engineer for 40 years. And in those 40 years, he saw things and learned things and documented things that no one else bothered to record. In 1962, Thomas commissioned a geological survey of the land around this signal box. He had noticed, in the course of his work, certain things about the stone formation beneath the embankment, things that were confirmed by the survey, but that he was never able to act on, because in 1963 British Railways began the beaching cuts, and the Darnwell Junction line was closed in 1968, and Thomas retired and came back to Shropshire to live out his remaining years. He bought this strip of land in 1969 from British Railways for almost nothing because no one wanted it. He spent 2 years building the hidden room and waterproofing it and organizing everything inside. Then he gave it to me when your grandfather and I married in 1974, with instructions to keep it safe and to give it one day to whoever in the family needed it most. I have been researching Thomas's findings for 7 years. The Railway Heritage Trust has helped me understand the historical significance. But there is more than history here, Wren. Read the surveyor's report. Then call Bernard Croft at the Trust. Then find yourself a solicitor who is not afraid of a complicated situation. I am sorry I cannot give you more. I am sorry the care home took what I had intended to leave you. But Thomas always said that the best inheritance is the one no one thinks to look for. I love you both more than you will ever know. Now go and see what you have. All my love, Gran. I folded the letter and put it back in the tin box and held the box in my lap for a long time without speaking. Piper sat down beside me on the floor. She did not ask what the letter said. She waited. In the particular way she has always waited for things, with complete and absolute patience. Gran left us something real. I finally said, "I know," said Piper. "I could feel it here. I want to pause here, because I think this is the part of the story where I need to be honest with you about what the next 3 months actually felt like, because stories like this can make the difficult parts sound cleaner than they were. The difficult parts were not clean. We were still in foster care. I was trying to finish my A-levels at a school where I knew no one and could not concentrate. Piper was struggling with the move, with missing our grandmother, with the ordinary cruelty that 11-year-olds sometimes inflict on newcomers. We were living in someone else's house, sleeping in someone else's beds, eating meals at someone else's table, and being endlessly, exhaustingly grateful for it. And I was trying, simultaneously, to understand the contents of a hidden room in a derelict signal box, while keeping that information private, until I understood what it meant. Bernard Croft helped me first. He drove up from his home in Ludlow 3 weeks after I emailed him, a man in his mid-70s with white hair, a railway enthusiast anorak, and the sharpest mind I had encountered since my grandmother. He walked through the signal box with the expression of someone being reunited with an old friend. "Your grandmother found the maintenance logs in 1987, he told me, standing in front of the lever frame, running his hands along the polished metalwork with practiced reverence. The original operating logs from 1923 to 1968. 45 years of every train that passed through this junction, every signal operated, every fault, every weather event. It's a complete record of a significant Midland Railway junction, and it's almost certainly unique. What's it worth?" I asked. Bernard gave me a look that was gently reproving. To railway historians? Immeasurable. To a museum? Significant. The National Railway Museum in New York has been trying to locate a complete set of Darnwell Junction records for 30 years. Your grandmother refused to donate them until she understood everything they contained. And the signal box itself? If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The lever frame alone, he said carefully, is one of the finest surviving examples of the Tire and Company No. 6 configuration in England. There are 3 others I know of, and all of them are incomplete or in poor condition. This one, he spread his hands, has been maintained. It's operational. A working Tire and Company frame in the original railway context is extraordinarily significant. I nodded slowly. And the Geological survey? Bernard was quiet for a moment. Your grandmother asked me to help her interpret it. Yes. I put her in touch with a geologist I know at the University of Birmingham, Dr. Priya Anand. She reviewed the 1962 survey and conducted her own assessment in 2019. He looked at me steadily. I think you should speak to Dr. Anand directly. Dr. Priya Anand was 43, direct, and not given to softening things unnecessarily, which I appreciated. She came to the signal box on a Tuesday afternoon in April with a geologist's hammer and a laptop full of ground-penetrating radar data, and spent 4 hours inside and around the building before she sat down with me on the iron staircase and told me what Thomas Randolph Callaway had found in 1962. The land beneath the embankment, beneath the signal box, and extending for approximately 2 acres to the northeast, sat above a naturally occurring cavern system formed in Silurian limestone. The caverns were not large by geological standards, but they were structurally significant, and more importantly, they contain a spring, a genuine limestone spring producing water of exceptional mineral purity. Your great-grandfather-in-law recognized a spring in the 1950s, Dr. Anand said. He noticed the water table behavior during heavy construction work nearby. He commissioned the survey to confirm it. In 1962, that information had no particular commercial value. Water springs were not a significant business proposition. But now, I said. She looked at me with the even expression of someone about to say something they have been carefully refraining from saying. Natural limestone spring water from verified geological sources is currently an extremely valuable commodity. There are mineral water producers operating on sources significantly less pure and significantly less geologically documented than what is beneath this land. She paused. Your grandmother understood this. She spent the last years of her life building the documentation necessary to verify and protect claim. I looked out across the field where the old railway line used to run. The embankment was green with grass and foxgloves, and somewhere beneath it, in the dark beneath the limestone, water was moving that had been moving since before the railway existed, since before anyone had thought to put a signal box at Darnwell Junction. She couldn't access it herself, I said slowly, because of the debt. Because the care home took everything she had liquid. She protected what she could protect, Dr. Anand said. The land, the documents, the evidence. She could not convert it to cash in time to save herself. But she made absolutely certain it would be intact for whoever came after. I thought about my grandmother in that care home, in those last years, knowing what was in the hidden room, knowing she could not reach it, writing me that letter and trusting that I would find it in time. I did not cry then. I cried later, privately, in the way I had learned to do things privately over years of living in places where privacy was not guaranteed. But I felt the weight of what she had carried, and I felt it settle onto my own shoulders, not as a burden but as a responsibility I was choosing to accept. What do? I asked Dr. Anand. She picked up her laptop. First, you need a specialist property solicitor, not the one who handled the estate. Someone who understands listed buildings, geological rights, and heritage assets. I can give you a name. She paused. Second, you need to understand that this will take time. It may take years. You're 18, you're in foster care. You have no capital and no established credit. The process will be slow. But it's real, I said. The claim is real. The claim, she said precisely, is as thoroughly documented as anything I have encountered in 20 years of geological consultancy. Your great-grandfather was a meticulous man. Your grandmother was meticulous. And what they built together over 60 years of careful, patient work is a legal and geological case that I believe is entirely sound. She looked at me. Yes, it's real. There is a particular loneliness in knowing that you have something of value that you cannot yet reach. It is different from the ordinary loneliness of having nothing. It is sharper, somehow more specific. You can see the shape of the life you might live, and you cannot touch it yet. I learned to sit with that feeling rather than fight it. My grandmother had sat with it for years. Thomas had sat with it for nearly a decade before he died. Patience was perhaps the most significant thing either of them had left me, and it was not in the hidden room. It was an example of how they had lived. The solicitor Bernard found for me was a woman named Caroline Marsh, based in Shrewsbury, who handled heritage asset cases and had represented 2 previous railway preservation trusts in boundary disputes. She reviewed the documentation in the hidden room over 2 weeks, and then called me with the careful, measured energy of someone who is professionally obligated not to overstate things, but is finding that difficult. The documentation is extraordinary, she said. The geological rights on the spring are separate from the surface land, rights in ways that work very much in your favor. The listed building status, which the previous solicitor presented as a pure liability, is actually protective. It prevents anyone from building on or demolishing the structure, which means the underground spring access point beneath the building's footprint cannot be disturbed without your consent. How long? I asked. To establish the geological rights formally, 18 months to 2 years. To develop the water source commercially, longer. But, she paused, I want to be honest with you about something. There will be people who want to buy this from you the moment word gets out about what you have. There will be offers. Some of them will be very large. And you will need to be very clear about what you want, because selling early means selling cheap relative to the long-term value. I thought about the signal box. I thought about the lever frame, polished by my grandmother's hands. I thought about Thomas building the hidden room with the care of someone who understood that some things take a long time to become what they are meant to be. We're not selling, I said. Caroline was quiet for a moment. All right, she said. Then let's talk about what you're building. Let me tell you about the people who appeared. Bernard Croft was the first. He came every Saturday through that spring and summer, ostensibly to help catalog the railway documents, but in practice simply to be present, to bring sandwiches and tea in a flask, to tell us stories about the signal box when it was operational, about the signalmen who had worked those levers, about the trains that had passed through Darnwell Junction on their way to Crewe in Hereford and the Welsh coast. He had known signal boxes his whole life. This one, he said, had always felt different to him. Alive, he said once, which was not the word I expected from a retired civil engineer. There are buildings that feel lived in even when they're empty. This is one of them. He was right. There was a quality to the air inside the signal box that I noticed every time I entered, a stillness that was not the stillness of abandonment, but of expectation, as though the building itself had been waiting. The second person was a woman named Hargreaves, who appeared at the base of the iron staircase one Wednesday afternoon with a cover plate and the information that she had lived in the nearest farmhouse for 40 years and had noticed us going in and out. She was 71, sharp-eyed, and had apparently had a conversation with Bernard, because she arrived already knowing the outline of our situation and having already decided what she thought about it. She thought we should stay. She thought we should fight. She thought my grandmother had been a remarkable woman who deserved better from the care system, and she intended to say so to anyone who would listen. She fed us regularly after that, not in a pitying way, but in the matter-of-fact way of someone who has always expressed care through practicality. Casseroles, bread, vegetables from her garden. On one occasion, a truly extraordinary rhubarb crumble that Piper still mentions with a reverence usually reserved for significant historical events. The third person was more complicated. His name was Owen Prest, and he arrived in May in a car that was slightly too expensive for rural Shropshire, wearing clothes that were slightly too new for someone who claimed to be just passing through. He said he was a property developer. He said he had heard the signal box was newly in private hands. He said he wanted to discuss possibilities. He offered me £40,000 on the spot. I was 18 years old. I had no savings, no stable housing, no certainty about the future. £40,000 was a number I could not fully process. I told him I would think about it. I did not tell him what was in the hidden room. I called Caroline Marsh that evening. Don't take it, she said. Don't take anything without speaking to me first. That offer tells us he knows something or suspects something. People don't offer $40,000 for a listed liability without a reason. Owen Press came back twice more that summer with increasing offers. The third offer was £90,000. He had stopped pretending to be just passing through. He had a surveyor with him. He had solicitors on retainer. I stood in the doorway of the signal box and told him no. He looked at me with an expression I recognized, the expression adults give to young people who are making what adults are certain is a mistake. Calm, slightly condescending certainty that I would eventually come to my senses and return with my hand out. You're going to need money, he said, not unkindly. You're in foster care. You have no income. This building is costing you in maintenance obligations. Be realistic. I thought of my grandmother, writing letters in a care home, protecting something she could not yet reach. I thought of Thomas, building the hidden room with quiet precision, trusting that patience was its own kind of action. My great-grandfather-in-law was a railway engineer for 40 years. I said, he noticed something no one else bothered to look at. He spent years documenting it carefully, and then he hid the documentation in a room behind a lever frame and trusted it to the right people. Owen Press looked at me carefully. The right people are here now, I said. The answer is no. He left. He did not come back. The guardianship hearing was in September. Caroline Marsh had worked on it for months, building a case that I could provide stable care for Piper on the basis of the signal box property and the developing asset case. It was not straightforward. I was 18. I was technically still in the foster system myself. I had no income in any conventional sense, but I had the land. I had the documents. I had Dr. Anand's geological report and Bernard's heritage assessment and Caroline's careful legal architecture. And I had, by then, a letter from a National Railway Museum expressing formal interest in a long-term heritage partnership that would include a small annual income in exchange for access to the lever frame and the operational logs. And I had Hargreaves, who appeared in court that September morning in a hat she had clearly purchased specifically for the occasion and told the judge with absolute conviction that she had known my grandmother for 30 years and that Eleanor Calloway had raised two extraordinary young women, and that she, Dorothy Margaret Hargreaves, would personally vouch for the character and capability of Wren Calloway with every particle of her considerable conviction. The judge was a quiet man with reading glasses, and the expression of someone who had been doing this work long enough to recognize when a situation was more complex than it appeared on paper. He read every document. He asked precise questions. He looked at me for a long time over his reading glasses. "You understand this is not a guarantee," he said. "You're taking on responsibility for your sister's welfare on the basis of assets that are not yet liquid." "Yes," I said, "but my grandmother did the same thing for 7 years, and she was right." He was quiet for a long moment. "Application granted," he said. Piper found my hand under the table and held it with both of hers, and I felt something settle in my chest that I had not known was unsettled, some tightly held tension I had been carrying so long I had forgotten it was not a natural part of breathing. "We're not going back," she whispered. "We're not going back." I said, "We moved into the signal box in October. It required work. The eastern roof section needed repairing, which Dot's neighbor Frank did in exchange for an agreement that we would let the local school visit the lever frame in the spring. The windows needed replacing, which Bernard organized through a railway preservation contact who sourced period-appropriate glass at cost. The brick base needed repointing, which I learned to do myself from a YouTube tutorial, and 3 weekends of extremely cold, extremely satisfying work. We divided the upper floor into 2 sleeping spaces and a shared area, using the original signal box partitions as a framework. We kept the lever frame intact, because to move or alter would violate the listed building requirements, and also because it was magnificent and we did not want to alter it. We installed a small wood burner in the corner, using an existing flue. We put bookshelves along the wall opposite the windows, and filled them slowly, secondhand, over months. We kept the hidden room exactly as we found it, with one addition. We framed a copy of my grandmother's letter and hung it beside the photograph of Thomas and Eleanor, the one where she is laughing, and he is smiling in the way people smile, when they are too careful to be exuberant but feel it anyway. Our home was a listed building. It was 30 feet long and 12 feet wide. It smelled of old timber and machine oil and a particular mineral-clean smell of the limestone spring that ran beneath us, rising occasionally when I pressed my palm to the floor in certain places and felt the faint, cool breath of it. I have never lived anywhere that felt more like home. The geological rights were confirmed in January of the following year. Caroline called me on a Thursday morning, and her voice had the careful, controlled quality of someone maintaining professional composure while feeling something considerably more than professional. "The rights are confirmed," she said. "The spring is yours. The water quality testing is complete, and the results are exceptional. We're ready to begin discussions with potential licensing partners." It took another 14 months after that. 14 months of meetings and negotiations and due diligence and moments of doubt and moment of absolute certainty, and a period in the autumn when everything seemed to stall, and I sat in the signal box at night, listening to the wind in the lever frame, and reminded myself that my grandmother had sat with this for 7 years. The licensing agreement was signed on a Thursday in March. I was 20 years old. Piper was 13. The Mineral Water Company was based in Herefordshire, family-owned, with a record for environmental responsibility that Caroline had checked exhaustively before she would let me consider them. The terms of the agreement included a per liter royalty on all water extracted, an annual access fee, and a clause that protected the signal box structure and the heritage documents permanently. It was not a fortune, not immediately, but it was real, and it was ours, and it would grow. Bernard was there when I signed. He brought champagne, which we drank on the iron staircase in the March cold, which was not sensible but was absolutely right. That Hargreaves appeared within the hour, having been told by Bernard, and brought a cake she had clearly made the night before in anticipation. Your grandmother will be very pleased, Bernard said, raising his glass toward the signal box. I looked up at the building, at the dark exterior, weathered in particular, at the windows reflecting the pale March sky, at the iron staircase that groaned when the wind blew. She'd be furious it took this long, Piper said. We both laughed because she was right. I want to tell you where we are now. Piper is 16. She attends school in Shrewsbury and has developed, in the past 2 years, a passionate and extremely detailed interest in geology, which surprises no one who knows our history. She has a particular gift for noticing things other people miss, which was always true, and has now become the foundation of something that might be a career. She leads the school visits to the signal box, taking groups of children through the lever frame with the patient authority of someone who has spent years understanding something and is now translating for others. She knows the name of every lever, the function of every signal it controlled, the history of every train that passed through Darnwell Junction from 1923 to 1968. She knows, in other words, everything my grandmother spent years learning, because the operational logs are now cataloged and she has read every one of them. The National Railway Museum Partnership is operational. The lever frame has been formally assessed as one of the most significant surviving examples of its type in England, and museum staff come twice a year to inspect and maintain it. We have had visitors from railway preservation societies across Europe. We have had a documentary crew from a heritage television program. We have had 3 different academic papers written about the Darnwell Junction operational records. The signal box has also been formally recognized, following Bernard's tireless lobbying, as a heritage property of special interest, which has additional legal protections that I will not go into here, but that matter considerably. The mineral water is in production. You can buy it in shops in Herefordshire and Shropshire, and increasingly elsewhere. It is labeled with a drawing of the signal box, which was Piper's idea, and which I think Thomas would have found quietly satisfying. The royalties have paid the property costs comfortably for 2 years running, and the projections suggest the income will grow as distribution expands. We are not wealthy, but we are stable, which is something we have not been since we were very small children, and it is extraordinary, the feeling of stability, ordinary to people who have always had it, extraordinary to those who have not. Caroline Marsh is still our solicitor. Bernard comes every few months and sits in the signal box and tells us things he remembers about the old railway. Dot Hargreaves comes for dinner on Sundays, which has become a tradition so established that it no longer requires an invitation. And the hidden room is still there, behind the lever frame, accessible through the small door that no one would find unless they knew where to look. We leave the door unlocked now. There is nothing in it that needs hiding anymore. But I go in sometimes in the evenings and sit in the dry quiet of it and think about Thomas building it in 1969 and my grandmother maintaining it for 30 years and the chain of care and patience and trust that ran through 3 generations and ended finally with the 2 of us. Some things take a very long time to become what they are meant to be. Thomas knew that. Eleanor knew that. I am beginning to understand it myself. Last month, Piper found something. She was cleaning the operational logs, preparing them for a new round of archival photography for the museum, when she noticed that the last entry in the log, dated November 14th, 1968, the final day of operation at Darnwell Junction, was signed not by the official signalman on duty that day, but by TRC. Thomas had been there. On the last day, he had worked the levers for the final train that passed through Darnwell Junction, and he had signed the log, and beside his signature, in the small, neat handwriting we had come to know, he had written 3 words, "Until we return." Piper brought me the log and pointed to it without speaking. I read it 3 times. Then I thought about him. This man I had never met, who had been a railway engineer for 40 years, who had noticed something beneath the limestone that everyone else had missed, who had built a hidden room and filled it with careful documentation, and trusted it across decades to people who did not yet exist, who had come back on the last day of the railway's operation, worked the levers one final time, and written 3 words in a log he knew would be kept, not because he expected to return himself. He died in 1971, but because he knew that someone would. He meant us, Piper said. I looked at the signal box around us, at the lever frame with its 42 polished levers standing in their colored rows, at the windows looking out over the old line where foxgloves grow now where rails used to run, at the floor my grandmother had swept in the lock she had kept oiled, and the key she had given to a 13-year-old girl with instructions to know when to use it. Yes, I said. He meant us. Before I finish, I want to ask you something. My great-grandfather-in-law spent his career noticing what other people walked past. He noticed water beneath limestone. He noticed a spring beneath an embankment. He noticed a potential in something that the institution he worked for had decided was finished. My grandmother spent 30 years caring for something that had no obvious current value, maintaining it and researching it and protecting it on nothing more than the conviction that patience applied to the right thing is its own kind of action. What are you walking past? What is sitting in the corner of your life, in the back of your family's history, in the thing everyone calls a liability or an eccentricity or a burden that someone built with care and left for you to find? It might not be a signal box. It might not be a spring beneath limestone. It might be a skill your grandmother had that no one thought to value, a story no one has told properly yet, a piece of land your family held when everyone said to sell, a way of seeing the world that the people around you have always called impractical. The most significant things I've found in my life were in a room behind a lever frame that everyone assumed was empty because they did not look. Look, and if this story moved something in you, if it made you think about the hidden rooms in your own history, then I want to hear from you. Leave a comment and tell me, what is the thing in your life that everyone else calls worthless? What are you finally ready to open the door to? Your signal box is waiting. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story. Thank you for spending this time with us. We started with £1 and a key on a faded ribbon. We inherited what everyone called a liability. They were wrong about what it was worth. They were wrong about what we were worth. And so, is anyone who has ever told you the same?